Yeah. You know, there's every so often a debate about whether or not there is such a thing as a vanguard of the working class and how do you figure it out. Well, I think if you organize a conference that goes from 9 till 6:15 and you're at the end and you see who's there, you found your vanguard. All right, so thanks for sticking around, folks, especially because, you know, I appreciate being heard. So Ann got a little mad at me because I also wanted to talk about Wisconsin. I think there's actually some reasons for it. One is because it's the lessons that it presents are so clear. It is 5 years ago, so I know for some of you that means you were kind of young at the time, and I hope this is not totally new, but I think you're getting at least a few dimensions of the struggle. Okay, the public worker struggle in Wisconsin, already more than 5 years old, provides us with many brightly outlined lessons. The first was meted out to Governor Scott Walker himself. You see, he introduced his anti-union bill on February 11th of 2011. I don't know what he considered when picking out this date to declare war on labor, but February 11th, 2011 just happened to be the same day that a mass rebellion in Egypt forced Hosni Mubarak from office. The Midwestern workers of Wisconsin did not pass over this coincidence, but saw it as their cue. And on that day, Scott Walker learned an important class struggle lesson: ignore the world situation at your peril. So a sleep-in that began as a tactic to support the Democrats' legislative game was spurred by a student walkout and an illegal teachers' strike to become a qualitatively different struggle that for a moment took the fight beyond business as usual and allowed working class unity on a greater scale than seen in a generation at least. This independence and unity was broken by the recall fight. This turn brought the unions under their bosses' wings again, and so cut the public workers off from the rest of their class. To recall, and I think it really, if you weren't paying attention at the time, it really was enormous. There were pizza orders coming in from around the world, coming in from Iran. We had one comrade in a very small town where there were demonstrations twice a day. The guy who always complained about the activists was out there carrying the bullhorn. It was that kind of thing that was going on. And these, again, like Ann pointed out, were not public workers for the most part. To recall Walker, the union's first supported Democrat, Kathleen Falk, who bragged about getting concessions from workers without removing bargaining rights. But she lost to an even more hostile mayor, Tom Barrett, who opposed raising taxes above pre-Walker levels and had already used Walker's anti-union laws against Madison workers, a fact that Walker gleefully broadcast in his campaign advertisements. During the uprising, Barrett even proposed a bill to extend cuts to firefighters who Walker had spared. Playing the employer's game and backing Barrett meant abandoning those facing higher tuition costs, those thrown off state health care, poor public workers, and women facing unemployment discrimination and lost abortion access. And this is because they also restricted the fight to simply opposing the parts of the law that restricted bargaining rights. So they left all the economic stuff on the table. Worst of all, before the entire state and country, the unions supported a clear enemy of labor who used the very law they set out to oppose. How this discredited the union movement should be no mystery at all. And if you didn't catch it, by the end of the recall, they not only lost all their politics, they also lost the recall. Their candidate lost against Walker. What could Wisconsin workers have done had they continued on the road they started instead of returning to their old masters? They could have used the momentum of 2 months to build a support for greater strike action, including the general strike demanded by many. They could have expanded the struggle beyond Wisconsin, especially to states like Michigan and Ohio, where similar struggles would be crucial. And I'll tell you, I know someone for whom those struggles were crucial. They could have lent solidarity from this high-profile struggle to others, winning allies and educating about the importance of unions through propaganda of the deed. Where appropriate and possible, they could have expanded the demands of the fight. Not for everything under the sun, maybe not socialism now, but they could have based their demands on the consciousness and militancy of working people rather than the framework imposed by big business. They could have changed the terms of the fight by showing how corporations, the rich, and the military hoard wealth created and needed by working people, They could have demanded, for say, a higher minimum wage, supported an organizing drive of private sector workers to show what unions can do, or perhaps demanded a mass jobs program. In other words, their struggle won the hearts of millions because it embodied the collective fight back we all wanted and we all want. Independent from the bosses' parties, they could have taken this power even further. And I want to point out, when I say raise the minimum wage, I don't throw that out lightly. Remember, the fight for 15 started just a short time later in the Occupy Wall Street movement, only a few months later. So there were greater struggles that were waiting in the wings. Had the Wisconsin struggle gone further, it could have started them on a much higher level. What can we learn from this fight about what workers need to do to organize and win? First, it has already been noted, workers must organize independently from the bosses and all their institutions, organizations, and parties. Second, unity with the bosses' parties prevents unity among working people. Third, workers must organize as a class, not as sectional groupings divided by workplace, region, country, and so on. Working people are capable of such class consciousness. The success and failure of their struggles lives and dies on their understanding of their collective condition. Fourth, the leadership of the union presented an obstacle to the realization of both independence and class unity. Fifth, the rank and file of unions can burst into what appears to be spontaneous action that bucks their own leadership, breaks from the employer's leadership, and overcomes everyday divisions between working people. Sixth, this spontaneous action is not enough on its own to break the grip of the bosses over the labor movement. Clearly, trade unions are not irrelevant as a force in our society. Clearly, too, more work must be done within unions to turn them into tools of class struggle. But it is not just a question of more work, although Anne's point is very key. She left this part to me, which is why I'm not saying Anne left this out. I'm saying this is the part I was assigned to do. It is not just a question of more work. Class collaboration as leadership in unions is aided and directed by capitalist parties, think tanks, foundations, universities, not to mention the state itself. This is not a problem that can be solved by individuals acting on their own. People with the objective of renewing working class struggle have to work together. They need organization. Their ideas don't hang in the air. And if they are to break working people from the hold of the employers, they must create an organization which seeks to advance the interests and power of the working class as a whole, not just one section of it. The union, based in a specific workplace, is important, but it can't be this organization. On most days, working people do not act as a class. They do not put forward demands as a class, or even begin to formulate such demands. Even on most days when working people begin to fight. But on some days they do. And over the last 150 years, this class has accumulated quite a history of such demands, partial and finished, along with a record of struggle showing what has worked and what has not. This record does not come cheaply. Millions have given their lives to help produce it in victory and defeat. Fighters for working class independence must learn from these struggles to save our class setbacks and defeats and reduce the price paid for victories. It must transmit the programmatic gains refined over generations. It must develop and refine theory to make sense of the history and apply it to new situations. And it must share this understanding. It must participate in struggle because history and theory are no more useful here in the hands of a bystander than an electrician's manual would be for someone who's never screwed in a light bulb. At the same time, the broadest layers of working people learn less through forums and pamphlets and conferences like this than through struggle itself. Not that these aren't important, but that if we want to raise the level and understanding of the entire class, it's going to come in other ways as well. In other words, fighters for working class independence need to build political organization, parties, but not the same kind of political organization used by business. The bosses have armies, courts, governments, direct ownership of property, and the world's capital at their disposal. The advocates of working class independence have have the working and oppressed people of the world. Their political organization is not oriented towards getting people elected to office in order to pass legislation or towards winning approval for official policy. It seeks to unite all exploited and oppressed people around a common program and a common struggle to overturn their condition. Whereas bourgeois politics derives its power from private property and a military hierarchy, socialist politics bases itself on the power of working people. However, the power workers have at the point of production can only be fully realized when workers organize as a class, when they take democratic command of all basic industry, when they win to their side the majority of soldiers who give the boss's state its power over our lives, when they abolish this state, and when they put in its place their own, run democratically by their own organizations and institutions. Every struggle short of this outcome will end as a kind of armistice, with one side holding more or less than it did at the outset, all gains up for grabs in future conflicts. And in this society, there is one ruling class, and that is the capitalist class. As the ruling class, all the dominant institutions are theirs. The state is theirs, the technology is theirs, the land, capital for investment, machinery of production, and access to basic necessities are all in their hands. Even the dominant ideas are theirs. This and the fact that capitalism always tends towards crisis means that every victory earned by working people in this society, every victory earned by working people in this social order is endangered the moment the truce is signed. For examples of what I mean, look no further than the assault on unions, the resegregation and privatization of schools, the new Jim Crow through mass incarceration, attacks on women's reproductive rights, or even the renewal of anti-gay business policies following the legalization of same-sex marriage. And so the class struggle cannot be reduced to a struggle of reforms, an accumulation of victories. Though the fight for reforms is essential, it must be directed towards a struggle for power. This understanding is a great conquest of the workers' movement around the world. In this country, it was put down in words 111 years ago at the great founding convention of the industrial workers of the world, in the preamble of that organization's manifesto. The convention brought together some of the most dynamic and heroic leaders of the time, who have been steeled in many of the early battles of the modern American working class, including such giants as Eugene Debs, who you may have heard about a little bit recently, Mother Jones, Daniel De Leon, Lucy Parsons, and Big Bill Haywood. The preamble to their manifesto reads, "The working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things in life. Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class, take possession of the means of production, abolish the wage system, and live in harmony with Earth." Yeah, that's 111 years ago. This objective, if it is to be realized, cannot be severed from the struggle for reforms. The fight for reforms today must prepare the ground for a struggle for power tomorrow, where such a struggle will never be successful. It is also logical that a movement or organization that does not believe in the workers' ability to run society or the need for workers to fight for power will not place much faith in the need for independent organization. These two things hang together. Socialists' distinguished ability to unite different parts of the working class in a fight separate and against the ruling class, often transgressing bourgeois law, is visible throughout socialist and working class history. In the Toledo Auto Light Strike of 1934, the Socialist American Workers' Party united workers with the Socialist American Workers' Party united unemployed workers with Autolite workers, cutting off the route to scabs, and together fought the National Guard to literally their last drop of tear gas, handing the American working class its first major strike victory of the Depression. During and after the Autolite strike, Trotskyists in Minneapolis turned a strike of coal shovelers into a mass unionization drive in trucking that overcame artificial craft divisions imposed by boss-friendly union leaders, and they produced a general strike and took control of the roads. During that strike, you literally couldn't drive in town without a permit from the union. Revolutionaries also led key sit-down strikes during the Depression era, which by their very nature were not only extremely effective, but violated the owner's private property rights. Revolutionary socialists during the Vietnam War actively sought to connect the student movement to active soldiers through cafes, mass marches, newspapers, defense campaigns, and mass leafleting on military bases. One, the Pentagon believed the ground troops had become a liability in the war effort and feared the collapse of the military itself. Today, the struggle against climate change cannot succeed without winning over industrial workers. This movement must go up against an industry and associated banks with roughly $37 trillion in fossil fuel reserves or value tied to fossil fuel reserves and infrastructure. The fight for renewable power will not be won without the active participation of fossil fuel workers themselves, and it certainly won't be won against them. In other words, the climate movement has to convince fossil fuel workers to fight for the abolition of their own jobs. How else could such a fight be waged without workers organized as a class? Without workers prepared to reorganize society against the principles of the market, wage labor, and profit? Similarly, where could the movement for Black lives and against police brutality possibly go without going against the idea that without the main prerogatives of police in the society? Reasons like these, even small groups with the right approach to struggle, are indispensable to social movements today. And this is a very good time to get involved. People are getting serious about ideas as well as action. And if you're interested in getting involved and learning more about socialism and socialist action, a nucleus for the kind of organization described here, or Youth for Socialist Action, please do come and visit our table or start a conversation with one of us here. And finally, I just want to say, I realized one thing that really was important in my life. Someone pointed out in a speech I saw when I was 16, you don't want to wait until you're middle-aged to get involved. There's always a later. But the fact of the matter is, if you are young right now, this is the most available time you have to get involved. If you wait till you are 40 to start doing this stuff, you will find you know as much then as you know now. And you're going to have kids or some other obligation that will make it much harder for you to do this. So if you are considering this, take that leap, get involved. Thank you.